Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gauri Gupta, and I lead CSF's work in education technology. It is indeed a privilege to be here today. I would like to spend the next few minutes introducing the report to you. Over the last couple of years, there has been growing awareness and political salience around the use of technology in education, with increasing investment in the sector. During school closures, there was a rush to find innovative ways of delivering education to children, largely supported by tech. Even as schools reopen and we thrive in the normalcy that comes with it, the need to find ways of ensuring remediation, practice, self-learning becomes even more critical. Digital learning can play an important role in democratizing the quality of education and supporting learning recovery both in schools and at home. In an effort to better understand how technology can be used and incorporated into teaching learning practices, we undertook this effort of creating a summary of EdTech in India, touching upon the history of policy, evidence, and the market context. Having a lot of questions about technology and how it can support learning, we drew insights from past experience and went to domain experts from government, academic institutions, product companies, NGOs, consultancies, schools, teachers, and students to understand how to approach this topic and define the scope of this paper. After having gone through an extensive process of discussion, deliberation, review, and secondary reviews, we are delighted to share our learnings through this report titled EdTech for India, Leveraging Technology to Bridge Learning Gaps. I would like to extend our gratitude to Professor Sridhar Iyer, Professor and Head of the Education Technology Program at IIT Bombay, for being the primary reviewer of this paper and providing his guidance through the process. I would also like to thank Dr. Santosh Mathew, Country Lead Public Policy and Finance at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for writing the foreword to this paper. This paper would not have been possible without the many contributors, and we are truly grateful for all your valuable time and investment in this process. The report, EdTech for India, Leveraging Technology to Bridge Learning Gaps, focuses on ways to democratize the use of technology for education both at home and in schools. The objective of this paper is to reduce information asymmetry in the sector by presenting a comprehensive and balanced view of how EdTech can be leveraged to enhance teaching learning practices in India. It talks about the K-12 EdTech sector in India and covers context, challenges, opportunities, and the way forward. Our hope is that this paper will be relevant for a variety of stakeholders, supporting policymakers in building a sound understanding of EdTech for school education, for practitioners in thinking deeply about deploying and using tech, for informing the wider ecosystem of the potential of EdTech for the low income. The first two sections present an overview of the state of school education and talk about the key challenges in the Indian education system. They also present a variety of use cases of technology that can support in mitigating these challenges. For example, lesson preparation, lesson delivery, homework assessment, parental participation, etc. We then talk about the National Education Policy released in 2020 and discuss tech-related highlights from the NEP. The paper also discusses important institutional reforms proposed, such as the National Educational Technology Forum and the National Digital Education Architecture called India. Section 4 traces the evolution of EdTech policies in India and highlights the different historical government and non-governmental initiatives that have been implemented to support digital learning. We move on to analyze the current state of EdTech infrastructure, software, and capacity in the country, highlighting key challenges and opportunities relating to each, and discuss the growth of the private ecosystem and EdTech market in India. The next section discusses government response to the pandemic and school closure, as well as highlighting the opportunities and challenges relating to blended learning in a post-COVID business as usual setting. In order to understand how tech has been leveraged elsewhere, we then analyze local and global evidence relating to the use of technology in education, including via personalized adaptive learning, computer-assisted learning, and in assessments. We then analyze the EdTech approach and strategies of China, Indonesia, the US, and Singapore to contextualize and apply their learnings in an Indian context. Finally, the paper outlines recommendations for stakeholders based on insights from the different sections, which can serve as a springboard for EdTech policy and planning. It covers topics such as the importance of an EdTech planning framework, the importance of accountability in the system, the need for greater capacity building in EdTech, and increasing focus on foundational grades. We hope that many of you can take useful insights from this report. Do share your feedback with us as well. I now hand over to my colleague Monica, Director Strategic Partnerships at CSF, to introduce the panelists.
Thank you very much, Corey, for that quick overview of all the deep work that has gone into the EdTech paper over the last many months. It is my pleasure to introduce the esteemed panelists that we have today. Two of them will be joining us shortly. However, I continue to proceed in the order that in expecting that they will join. We have on the panel Sri Rajneesh Kumar, Director Digital Education, Department of School Education, Ministry of Education, Government of India. We have Sumit Mehta, the co-founder of Lead Schools. We have Dr. Ratnkamar Kavicharan, State Project Director, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and Commissioner of Primary Education in Gujarat. Nathan Castillo, Assistant Professor of Education Policy, Organization and Leadership at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, who will be joining us very shortly all the way from Chicago. And last, but not the least at all, a constant support and guide for all of us at CSF, Professor Sridhar Iyer, Head of Department of EdTech at IIT Bombay, the primary reviewer of this paper. Professor Iyer could not be here with us today, but has very kindly shared a video recording about key imperatives for different stakeholders in the EdTech system, and look forward to hearing his message now.
Let me start with introducing myself. I am Sridhar Iyer. I am a faculty member at IIT Bombay. So the EdTech report that we are now launching is an important piece of documentation. So it not only documents the history of how EdTech products have evolved, now in India as well as elsewhere, but also it makes recommendations of what we should do going forward. So I have been associated with it as a reviewer right from the inception, and I can say that a lot of aspects have been covered, a lot of thought has gone into creation of this report, and one of the ways it can see utility is if various stakeholders, government, foundations, etc., take it up and look at the recommendations in that and try to go in the direction of what the recommendations say. When we talk about implementing EdTech, often we take a consumer-based model, where the final student or the teachers are basically consuming the content, which is actually created elsewhere. So one of the key recommendations here is that the consumer-based model is not very effective. So what we want to do is actually go towards more of a participatory model, where the teachers are also participating in the creation of the product, because they are the ones who know their students, they are the ones who can say what is it that they want, what their students need, and so on. And the product should also, in a way, empower them to be creators and not just consumers. So any product, so the teachers should have some room to also deploy their own creativity and contextualize the product for their own classroom and do all that. While people may say that, look, teachers are very busy, they don't have time for doing this, they prefer lesson plans and so on. There are enough teachers who would actually take this creativity opportunity and do a good job of contextualizing the product for their own students. So we have seen lots of examples where teachers have been very creative in using EdTech products in their classroom. So that flexibility is again one important thing that we should recommend. Three things come to mind. So one is that we should focus on research-based products. So there are a lot of products out there, but then not all of them are based in research where there is evidence of the products being useful or achieving some desirable conditions. What we want to do is we want to do more research on that. So one of the imperatives would be to put in more funding in this area of research around products. So unless there is research, there cannot be new products, there cannot be effectiveness assessment and so on. So the other one kind of aligned with this is the fact that we don't want to be tied only to learning outcomes. So often when we talk about a product, we are always thinking about, do we want, does it improve student learning? Now that is just one of the factors, and that is a factor which actually we'll see much later. So if you look at the way learning science has evolved, and how learning products are evaluated, there are many stages before that. So there are stages of pre-evaluation. Before we get to randomized control trials, there are multiple stages that happen before that, which are actually meaningful ways to evaluate products. So the second point is that we should also do a rounded evaluation of the product and not simply base ourselves on empirical randomized evaluations. And the third one is again an important point, which is that often when we say tech implementation, the focus earlier used to be purely on the hardware, and now it's sort of like on the hardware plus the content. But what we need to do is we need to actually go beyond that also. The hardware and the content is only as good as the person who's using them, right? So what is important is to focus on the pedagogy of how to use this content meaningfully in the classroom. And so there is a need for a large amount of teacher training in order to make this happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sridhar Iyer. I know you couldn't be here today, but thank you for your contribution through the journey of this paper. Let's get started with a panel discussion. We were to have Dr. Rajneesh Kumar from the Ministry of Education. He is stuck in a meeting in the ministry. We hope to have him during the course of this discussion. But Sumit, my first question is to you, right? So Lead Schools has actually been pioneering in almost removing the borders and walls of classrooms and integrating technology in traditional teaching learning practices. Can you elaborate on your big three learnings in this process? Learnings vis-a-vis schools, teachers, parents.
Sure. Thank you, Gauri. And a lot of my learnings are not very different from what Professor Iyer just mentioned. Uh, as you know, LEAD is now working with close to 3,000 schools across the country to transform their learning outcomes. And we do it through an integrated system. And I think when he said it's not about hardware, software, or content, it's about how do we empower the teachers to really use it. So my big learnings are similar. I think the first is this became very evident during COVID that if the purpose of education is to build a whole child who can grow up to be a capable adult, responsible citizen, and a good human being, then education has to be a contact sport and its playground is the school. Uh, so now I know we can reach students, via WhatsApp, TV, or radio, but we can only achieve, I guess, basic literacy and numeracy through those mediums. Uh, but we should aim for nothing less than whole child development, and that will happen in a school. So I think that was one big realization. And now that schools have opened, it's more evident. Second, I guess the best use of technology is to empower the teacher, not replace her, especially if one is interested in whole child development. But this requires deep empathy of a teacher's life and challenges, and then designing a solution around it. It's not just a school ERP or a messaging system. And third big learning has been that technology is powerful in personalizing learning, but the important precondition is that it should connect in-school learning with at-home learning. Uh, Now, in classrooms, through technology, we've been able to personalize at the cohort or group level, but at home, we can personalize it to the unit of one student. The only thing required is that there has to be some integration which connects what is happening in school to what is happening at home so that the two are not operating in silos. So I would say those are three big learnings, and if we can incorporate that in solutions, then we can truly achieve whole school transformation and thereby improvement in learning outcomes.
And Sumit, can you elaborate a little bit on, which of these, from your experience, right, and having practically worked with the stakeholders, right? Which of these have you seen really transform in some ways education in action? And can you give real concrete examples of how it is happening?
Sure. See, I think our big learning is that if you look at school transformation, schools are complex ecosystems. So if I just give them an ERP or a messaging system or an assessment system, it basically works on the parts but doesn't result in whole child development. So I'll give an example. Earlier we used to have smart classes, and when we observed teachers, we realized that the big challenge was that if they have a textbook in their hand, at what point should they jump on to actually insert a pen drive and play a video? That wasn't evident because the teacher is performing live in a classroom, and unless she has planned before, it sometimes gets skipped, and then you end up doing a once in a week theater for the children where they come and see videos. So our realization was that unless the videos are embedded in the lesson plan in a conversion device, it will not get used. And that gave rise to the Lead Teacher app, where everything is converged into one device that the teacher uses to conduct their classrooms. Second, I think we realized that if schools have to deliver good learning outcomes, then they have to follow what we call the PTMR approach, which is prepare, teach, monitor, and remediate. All good teachers do it. But if we call teachers into a hall and try to train them on it, the implementation is very poor. But if we design a school operating system around PTMR, then teachers start to operate in that system, and their natural behaviors are what we know are behaviors of good teachers. So these are some specific examples of how integrated thinking in school transformation via technology can actually bring real change.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sunil, for those insights. SPD ma'am, can I direct my next question to you? So you may have seen many hits and misses in using technology over the last 2 years, right, while schools were shut. What are the top 5 things that you plan to do in your state to ensure that technology can be inclusive, support learners as well as teachers? We would love to hear from you.
Thank you, Gauri. COVID-induced pandemic has been a great test for all the educators and administrators. If not for technology, the impact on learning levels would have been worse. That experience taught us many things, and we are much more informed about EdTech, its benefits and limitations. We want it to be more equitable and support learners from all backgrounds, particularly first generation learners, those who lack support mechanism at homes when related to use of EdTech. We will ensure that every learner is exposed to use of technology at school through smart classrooms in all government schools. We have already having 15,000 classrooms in Gujarat, and we are planning for 48,000 for this year. We are utilizing G-Shala and Diksha as tech-driven solutions for students and teachers. Both these has given us head start to our students and teachers when it comes to having teaching and learning support on web and apps. Work is underway to have great e-content and educational videos made in a way to attract learners on YouTube and through apps. Content creation is happening at a very rapid pace in Gujarat.
That's very encouraging to hear. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I see Rajneesh ji on the panel as well. Welcome, Rajneesh ji.
Thank you. I'm sorry for being late.
No,
I'm controlled.
thank you for joining. And you're back in time for my next question, which is to you, sir. Tech became the mainstay of education during school closures, and now everyone seems to be really, really keen and almost scrambling to get back to business as usual. What do you think is the role that technology can still play to support our school system? And what is the vision of the government of India, and how is it translating into policy and action? Sir, over to you.
Well, actually, the role of digital technology and pandemic are actually mutually exclusive, I would say. It is just that the pandemic has got us to do things just 5 years ahead of times, because digital education is the future or technology is the future. It's not that teacher is going to get replaced. It is just that the teacher is going to get smarter. So the 30 minutes that the teacher has in class could be equivalent to an hour because of technology. And the vision of India, of course, as you all know, is the National Digital Education Architecture. We just had a meeting on that only, because of which I was late. And the whole idea is that if we want to go in for, multidisciplinary kind of teaching, personalized learning, customized learning, and choice students for subjects. No school can handle, physics, philosophy, sociology, arts, music, and 50 subjects. At most 10 subjects they can handle. So technology could be used. A child studies philosophy, hybrid mode, physics, offline mode, mathematics, online mode, could be anything. And the child has choice in 11 and 12 without going with that stream function that you are a commerce or an arts or a science graduate or a law graduate, a law student. So technology, pandemic or no pandemic, these are independent things. The only thing pandemic did was it just told us as a system that you better do it quickly. Yeah, thank you.
That is very encouraging to hear, Rajneesh ji. And, I think the government of India is in some ways a torchbearer for all that technology can, help education with, right? So it's very good to hear you when you say that, look, it's never the replacement for a teacher. It is, what can help a teacher perform more effectively. So thank you for those opening remarks. Thank you, Nathan, for joining. I know it's unearthly hour for you, so thanks for making the time. And Nathan, you have a view on programs and policies from, frankly, across the world. I've heard you present papers. So when you look at, all that is happening with regards to education technology from the world, right? What are some of the most promising tech-based interventions that you are seeing that have been able to actually support learning, right? And they have evidence and they are, in your mind, effective.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to this panel, and sorry for a little bit of technical difficulty logging in this morning, but I'm happy to be here and happy to provide a little bit of insight from my own research from some of the global work that I've been doing, looking directly into this topic of leveraging technology to improve learning outcomes. One that I would say, in response to your question, one of the projects that I particularly like that stood out to me is Wiz Education. This is out of Mathswiz in the UK, where it is this type of personalized learning approach to early numeracy that not only is proving effective in throughout education settings in the UK, but is also being tested and validated in other places that have less resources, such as in Kenya through the I Am Lango project. So taking initial assessments of students and digitally processing their information to understand where they're at within the trajectory of early numeracy, and then automatically programming learning trajectories so that students can go at their own pace and can have reinforcement of skills through numeracy in the classroom and in support of what the teacher is already providing them. The other project that I'd say is not even as high tech as the personalized learning, but does have some kind of individualized aspect to it. And this is a project that I was working on in South Africa that actually had origins in India as an adult literacy project. We adapted that several years ago to basic education and implemented it across 50 different school settings in rural South Africa. So leveraging some of the findings from the India component of the project, adapting it to the South African context, the rural South African context, and earlier grades through this multimedia platform, we were able to also see pretty strong advances, almost a year's worth of learning gains in not only literacy, but also comprehension. And I think the key to this project was the language component. So developing content, digital content that brought in culturally relevant material from the communities in which we were implementing, but also providing students with the ability to select the language of their choice to be able to engage with the content. And that was really exciting for the students. Both of these examples not only show how learning can be accelerated through digital media, but also increase the motivation and engagement of students by seeing digital content in their own language for the first time in many cases. Sorry, and that second project, the South Africa project, was called the Bridges to the Future Initiative.
Noted, noted. No, these are very exciting, and I think even during school closures, there is a lot of emerging global as well as Indian evidence around the use of technology for learning at home, even via low tech methods,
Yeah.
SMS, IVRs, etc. Right. So I think the one thing that the tech sector, at least in India, was lacking was evidence around what is working, and that would just make as many people skeptical about tech, right? So we are
Right.
happy that a lot of work is happening on the evidence side, right? So that we at least know what is working and how it is working. Monica, you want to take over the next round?
Thanks, Gauri, and thanks that we're all together on the same page as far as the key learnings that we've learned over the pandemic. Before that, about the teacher not being replaced, and the school, like Sumit, you said, is a very complex ecosystem, and EdTech has to be, integrated, and the key learnings that from all of us across the world have learned from each other, which is really wonderful to see. If I may come to you first, Sumit, you have an excellent vision of making excellent education accessible and affordable. How do you envision technology becoming an integral part of our public education system?
Sumit, you're muted, I guess.
You can't hear you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Got it. No, I think this is a deep problem, and I would say it requires a fundamental mindset shift. Our current vision of technology in public education, at least from the outside, seems to be fragmented. We think in terms of smart class implementation in a lot of our schools. When we make big announcements, tinkering labs, we think of direct to student online teaching, sometimes hybrid teaching. But I think what it loses is a deep understanding of how teaching learning truly happens through a deep understanding of human brain development, pedagogy, because we know that hardware or different channels will not improve education. For technology to become an integral part of our public education system, we need to first understand that technology is not an end in itself. It is a means to achieve whole child development at a level of quality that is currently unavailable. So one is we should not lower our bar that with technology we can just reach basic literacy and numeracy, we can provide access, because that will that will whet the appetite, but it will not fill the stomach. So we really need to work on keep the bar of quality high. Now, in order to do that, I think we need to first accept that the core issue is not technology or no technology. The core issue is first working on teacher will and skill, working on teacher empowerment, working on district and state capacity, working on school systems, and on school home integration. Now, technology can play a role in achieving all of this, but first, the vision of what is the end outcome we are wanting is really important. Uh, Now, if you ask me what will make it happen, I think it will require system thinking. It will require design thinking. It will not be done just with hardware implementation, software implementation, or opening new online channels. So this is similar to how in the past we used to do whole org transformation with technology as an enabler. This is about whole system transformation with technology as an enabler. It can play a part, but the larger whole is about first getting the vision right, first getting our strategy on teacher enablement and empowerment right, and then technology can follow.
No, thank you so much for that. You've made some very important points there, including the one about content and a certain benchmarking of content. And of course, the key feature in the entire ecosystem being the teacher and the will and skill that we all need to focus on. Along with that, you did mention design thinking, and on that note, Dr. Ravi Kumar, may I come to you? I read somewhere that the Vidya Samiksha Kendra had a prototype as far back as 2019, way before the pandemic. And probably Gujarat was doing a lot of forward-thinking design for education at that time. And I know that during the pandemic, there were almost 25 crore virtual lessons that were done by the government of Gujarat across about 54,000 schools. So I'd like to have your thoughts on what were the key factors of state preparedness that ultimately led to the EdTech support during the pandemic in Gujarat, and what are the lessons we learned from here? What can we carry forward with us?
Thank you, Ramonika. I would like to say that state preparedness is a function of many things, and state capacity to implement EdTech is dependent not just on state machinery of administrators or teachers, but it is highly dependent on society and state culture. Gujarat has a tradition of altruism, and community feeling is strong owing to the impact of Gandhian values. Thus, in villages and difficult areas where reach was limited, community-led solutions aided by teachers of small group classes using the limited resource of a single phone or laptop helped us reach a lot of learners. Also, overall prosperity had where to begin with few lacked access, and those who lacked access were helped by those more fortunate. And this is also true at state level, as the government is investing a lot over years to have prepared students to use computers through school labs and smart classrooms. The use of Microsoft Teams as a platform was in use even before the pandemic. This early exposure to virtual learning made the delivery easy for our teachers during pandemic. The state-of-the-art Vidya Samiksha Camp was already at initial stage of development, and it helped a lot during pandemic to have guided our effort based on the data points about reach, quality, impact, etc. Going forward, we hope that enhanced use of technology will help our learners derive higher value through maximum utilization of data insights from Vidya Samiksha Kendra and fully utilization of G Shala, Diksha, and other engaging e-content. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Ratnakumar. And leveraging technology for the greater good. I'm sure, Nathan, if I may come to you, you're at the cutting edge of research, and you were already talked about synthesizing learning across the world from South Africa, Kenya, India. So what are some of the promising educational policies and ecosystem structures specifically related to technology that can play a role in supporting student learning outcomes, especially in the context of India, as we learn from you and the rest of the world? Nathan, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Well, there's a lot of things that are at play when designing and implementing technology solutions, especially at scale. Myself, along with a team from UNICEF and my university, are wrapping up a study of ecosystem factors that do contribute to not only success, but sustainability at scale for technology solutions for learning. And I like how Samit recently stated that just now, that we can't be developing technology just for its own sake. We saw this earlier with the movement to increase access to schooling. And while we were able to increase access to schooling by building more schools from a supply side perspective, we found later on that a lot of kids weren't learning once they were in school. So similarly with technology, we can't just be developing technology without focusing on quality and issues related to equity in the design and implementation of technology solutions. And so this report this research that we've been engaging in is asking that question: how do we look at these ecosystem factors for improving learning outcomes and sustainability of technology solutions at scale? And so there's no easy answer to this. I think there's first and foremost, there needs to be a focus on advocacy for teachers. There needs to be ongoing support and other resources, either through coaching or ongoing professional development, that will enable teachers to understand how to use the new resources in support of their own pedagogy, but also how to make use of the data that they're receiving through the technology solution. One thing that's unique about technology is the massive amount of data and the timeliness of the data that teachers are receiving and other stakeholders are receiving this information. Well, what does that mean for the stakeholders? How are they going to be making use of this information, understanding it, and using it to improve or support their own practices? I think that's one of the main impediments of technology solutions that don't survive or don't succeed, is because there wasn't enough emphasis on this. We saw this in the earlier iterations of the one laptop per child program that has now reiterated itself and improved itself, particularly in the country of Uruguay in Latin America, where now it is one of the few technology solutions that has been implemented at a countrywide level, because there is clear integration and dedicated resources, not only from the government, but also across sectors, with private sector, public sectors coming together, and everybody being on the same page and providing the resources and commitment to the solution itself, but also to teachers. So I encourage you to look at that model in Uruguay, where it's a private organization, but it's this is the CEBAN, Plan CEBAN program that I'm referring to, where they're implementing computer-based or laptop-based learning across the country, with endorsement and dedicated support from the government, overseeing the implementation, all of the public schools across the country, and having that institutionalized support is something that's unique and I think necessary for the future of technology solutions for learning. And so just to conclude with that comment, the teacher support, the institutionalization of government, and also the dedicated partnership from a multi-sectoral perspective that I think are some of the key ecosystem factors to help EdTech thrive and survive within school systems in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nathan. You rightly focused on the stakeholders and all of them coming together. And as all of us need to remind ourselves, the ultimate stakeholder is the child here. The other stakeholder, key stakeholder, is the ministry, which has been very forward-looking in many of its policies over the last 2 years, coming out with the new education policy in July 2020. जिसमें already एक तरह से anticipating क्या pitfalls हो सकते हैं education technology में, which is quite an amazing forward-thinking document, really. And as Rajneesh pointed out, the pandemic really brought out some of the pitfalls that were subtle and hidden in our systems, in our ways of thinking across the ecosystem. So Rajneesh, मैं एक specific सवाल आपसे और मंत्रालय के ओर से करना चाहती हूँ कि key initiatives, what are the key initiatives जो ministry सोच रही है about learning recovery after COVID that we want to sustain going forward? I think.
For you mean for learning recovery, what ministry is doing?
Post-pandemic, we've talked about blended learning, we've talked about accelerated support from EdTech. What are we thinking of? What measures we can sustain post the pandemic on this account?
Well, you see, there are no prescriptions for this. It's a very case-to-case basis. Some people have lost 6 months of schooling, some 1 year, some 2 years, depends on the situation where it was. The whole idea is the core of what is to be taught in a class, that should not be left. Which means that suppose we reduce syllabus of class 5 and the child will never ever get to read that in class in his whole life. That is not the right thing to do. So the point is that there will be some gradation, that if somebody lost something in class 5, some part of it in class 6, some part in class 7, that has to be graded. Now that has been left to the teachers. to the administrators to understand where is the loss. Not every school or every student would have faced a loss. They would have made up somewhere. The only thing that we can provide equitable distribution is that by having excellent digital resources and resources which we are building, will take maybe some more time, in which there's a very customized kind of learning for the child. Now the whole point is to what about that child who has no access to devices, no access to internet? Of course, that will always remain a challenge. Their students, of course, are taking the typical path, the teachers, of trying to teach what was left in the last 2 years. And there's no easy solution to this, frankly. And the only strategy is that the core concepts have been defined by NCERT. They have reduced syllabus of many things without actually reducing the core concept area. And they have issued in the textbook itself, they have said related chapters, so that the coursework is a bit limited, and they can take some remedial measures to recover what was not taught in the last 2 years. But yes, no full recovery is possible. So even if somebody is claiming they will recover fully from the 2 years, I don't think that's a distinct possibility.
Yes, thank you. I was reading somewhere that almost 60% of children had no access to online resources. But administratively,
that's a very extraordinary condition. And in extraordinary conditions, things are not working our way. So
that's true.
So, I mean, it was bad luck for all. That's all. That's all we can say.
That's true. That's true. No, thank you so much for that. And we continue to look to the ministry for more forward-looking initiatives, and customizing learning for the child is a fantastic way to go when we look at the future ahead for our children. I would like to ask Ria now, who's anchoring this session, to maybe take some of the questions from the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amnika. And thank you to all our panelists for the very interesting discussion, and all our attendees for the great questions that have been coming in. We've been trying to answer some over chat as well. And if you go into the answered sections, you can go through some of the ones that have already been addressed. Maybe I'll start with the first question with you itself, Rajneesh ji. We have one question from Tarini, and she says, how will an initiative such as India boost synergy among different stakeholders, and how can private companies also be part of this initiative?
Well, the whole idea of India is interoperability and open access. We will shortly, maybe in a month or so, issue a policy for the ecosystem in which a lot of things will be open, and there will be some mechanism for private players to come on board, do some experiments, use the sandbox environment to fulfill their desire of using their application at scale. And of course, we'll be having multiple contracts on various aspects of the learning environment: Diksha, Swayamprabha TV channels, learning management systems, student registry. So the private players, without private players, of course, we cannot work. So there are two systems. One is that we'll actually engage startups to do something and have a contract with them. Other is that some people may like to offer things on their own as an experiment. Other is that through CSR funds, through foundations, people fund a startup and they work with us. There will be multiple models so that everybody has a way to participate in the NDR. There are 36 building blocks in 12 categories. We are defining that. We also bring out NDR standards so that everybody knows that if you work with the standard, you will be able to seamlessly work across the country. And we're trying a level best that every single state adopts those standards. It will take some time for people to adopt. And we also trying some reverse case. That if somebody has an application, let's make that the standard. Rather asking him to change to our standards, we will make that as a standard in case they own the software, they own the code, it's open source, open platform. Open standard or open source. So all these will be there. And then most importantly, in the policy, we'll write one thing, that everything is dynamic. The moment the market changes, we will change that policy. So it's not that what we've written is going to be the definition. We'll change as per the market scenario. If somebody gives us a good suggestion, that also will be incorporated very, very early into the policy. So I think NDR will be enabler to all, and it's an ecosystem approach, longitudinal records, inclusivity, all these are the basic principles of NDR.
Thank you so much, Rajneesh ji. I think, yeah, it's definitely very important that we have dynamism in everything that we do. Great. I'll move on to the next question. Maybe I'll pass it on to you, Nathan. We have a question from Rohit, and he says that talking about the importance of scale and efficacy in the EdTech space, how are we approaching the question of finding and scaling what works? Yeah, over to you.
I love that question. I think there's two ways to answer it. One is, what do we mean by scale? So I'm currently writing a paper, a background paper for the UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report that's coming out next year that focuses specifically on technology. And the contribution that we're making, myself and my colleague Dan Wagner are making to this body of research, is that building off of the work that I was doing from UNICEF, is that we have to think about scale from a multidimensional perspective. Oftentimes, especially in EdTech, we're considering scale from a vertical perspective. So we're trying to go deeper into a specific population to ultimately reduce the per unit cost per user. There's another consideration of scale as well. We can think of it as horizontal scaling, where we're trying to branch out to different demographics, different geographies, but also expanding. We can consider it horizontal scaling as expanding content or features, platform features. Now, what those two independent approaches to scale make intuitive sense, but what about how, when we layer on top of that a concept of understanding the local context and policy environment, so that we look at a transversal approach to scaling that combines both the vertical and horizontal. That's where we really need to be focusing our efforts when we're thinking about scale. Understanding that it can happen both ways. We can be more focused on a specific population, or we can try to expand out to different demographics and different geographies, with this understanding that context is at the center of how we think about scale. How we do that successfully, I think, is part of the question, correct? If you can help rephrase that for me, Raya.
Sorry?
The question was asking about.
Yeah. How are we approaching this question of finding and scaling what works?
Okay, so the other side of that thank you for that. It was helpful to bring me back to where I was going with my point. So it's not just understanding that we need government partners, public, other private sector partners. That's clear. These partnerships are important, but we also have to think about what are the strategic partnerships that will help us get to where we need to go. And so we've been seeing also from our research that vendors or implementing partners also have a necessity priority to understand where are the key and essential partners to bring into their own platforms or their own proposals. Oftentimes, it's implementing partners going after proposals as they're announced, or tenders, and responding to them. But there also needs to be an introspective conversation as implementing partners to understand, well, is this the right partnership that will get me to where I need to go with my endeavors for scaling? So there's two sides to that question. One is, as I mentioned, the different types of scale, being intentional about the type of scale that you're trying to achieve. And the other side of that is recognizing that not all partners will be able to provide you with the necessary resources to get to that particular type of scaling. So understanding how those relationships interact with your overall objectives and goals.
Thank you so much, Ethan. I'll move on with my next question to Dr. Ratan Kabar. If maybe you could take this next question. We have a question. I'm not sure who's it from. The initials are NB, but they ask about the ICT at schools policy, and they say that historically, EdTech policies and the ICT at schools policies have only covered older learners. So are there initiatives, how are we thinking of using technology to support younger learners as well?
We are for younger learners. So as per the new National Education Policy 2020, learning by doing is the basic concept. And in Nipun Bharat also, the emphasis has more been given for learning by doing. For that, in Gujarat, Pragya Abhigam is already going on since 10 years. In that, particularly learning outcome wise kits have been given for Gujarati, EVS, and for mathematics. And accordingly, children are doing their basic work. So initially, and for this technology, we have given solutions, and even to cover the learning loss during pandemic, we have given special Swadhyay Pothi, which covers the learning loss content as well as the revision exercise for the current academic year. We have formulated for standard 1 to 10. So this will cover our early learners also. Right now, we are providing all the ICT technology in upper primary, secondary, and higher secondary level. But gradually, we'll get it down to the initial standards of standard 1 to 5.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's encouraging to hear about what is being done for younger learners as well. There's a question in the chat specifically for Nathan, and maybe I'll ask you, Nathan, before you have to step out. There's a question around how would you recommend approaching the issue of building evidence around EdTech solutions, especially around their efficacy and building trust in an ecosystem which comprises both of users and developers? Let me know if you want me to repeat any part of that.
Thank you. I think these are great questions, and they're critical questions to ask when designing and implementing EdTech solutions. What we found in some of the earlier research, in the previous phase of the research, and continuing into the current ecosystem research that we're doing now around the world with UNICEF, is there isn't as much of an emphasis on evidence as we would have hoped there to be. One of the benefits of technology is that you have very direct and immediate access to data, as I mentioned earlier. So the fact that we're not, I guess, incorporating the access to this increased and real-time access to data is surprising. And it's something that we need to be more focused on as a community. So how do we improve that? Well, I think it parallels the comment that I made earlier about developing the necessary skills from stakeholders to be able to utilize the data in meaningful ways. I think that's where part of this disconnect is. Having access to the data, but not knowing what to do with it, or how to interpret it, or how to incorporate it into improved pedagogical practices. And so that's why I emphasize the importance of stakeholder support, not just teachers. Teachers are at the forefront because oftentimes this is being implemented either in a formal learning environment or an after-school environment with facilitators. We need to really ensure that the digital literacy skills are there for the facilitators as well, but also for the policy planners, the ones that are making decisions about how do we move forward with this? How do we sustain this intervention into a new administration? And how do we relay the evidence in a meaningful way that will produce longevity or continued buy-in from new administrations? And I think emphasizing evidence-based planning around technology is is key to its own sustainability. So I think that developing the skills of key stakeholders to understand the impact and the evidence behind the data that they're receiving is how we do that.
Great, thank you so much for that. We'll take one last question before we move on to closing. This last question is for you, Rajneesh ji. So I would like to direct it towards you. The question is, are there any regulations in place to safeguard schools, teachers, and students against, the privacy solutions and against EdTech selling products which claim to substitute classroom learning? So how can we safeguard our learners and teachers against some of the sort of worst consequences of tech relating to privacy?
Well, actually, you see, I'll answer this question. There are two domains. One is the domain of e-commerce, wherein a product is sold, advertised too well, and it does not serve the purpose. So that, of course, we have issued a guideline based on ASCII guidelines, the Advertising Standard Council of India, and using some Ministry of Electronics guidelines on data privacy, because that is a legal domain which is outside the domain of education. But we consolidated that and issued guidelines last November and keep reiterating every month to the states for citizens to take care. The other aspect is the core selling of the product as an e-commerce entity. So for that, the Department of Commerce has issued guidelines on what is an e-commerce entity, and if there's a contract between the customer and the seller, what are the guidelines to be used. So we have issued guidelines to citizens, to teachers, to parents, to principals, everybody, that they must take care in that legal framework. But from the ministry side, all we can do is we are professing that please use our Diksha once, use our technology once. Only if you're dissatisfied, go to the other. So we are trying our best to educate the people that use the government resource. And I'm sure that if they use the resource once, they won't find too much need. Of course, specialized education, like NEET coaching, JEE coaching, IS coaching, of course, that always will remain with these people. But core education of schooling, we're trying our level best that the parents don't fall prey to it. And I'll not call falling prey. Certainly, private sector has its advantages. It has customized things. It has private tutors. And why should we try to kill that space? The only thing is, they should promise to citizen what they cannot deliver. So that is an issue which the customer also has to take care. So it's based on that framework of the e-commerce transaction law and the data privacy law by the Ministry of Electronics and Advertising Standards Council of India guidelines. So that we keep professing.
Thank you so much, Rajneesh. Thank you to all our panelists for answering the questions. I'll now hand it over to Gauri for her closing comments.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience, for all these very interesting questions. And I would really like to, it's really great to hear such a nuanced perspective from such a diverse set of speakers today. One key and encouraging takeaway from all the speakers was that technology is here to stay and can actually enhance effectiveness of teaching learning practices. I think Professor Iyer set the stage when he said that it is clear that we require a participatory model of EdTech, where teachers and caregivers, the people who are actually implementing these solutions, have the knowledge, training, and flexibility to adapt them to their own needs. As Rajneesh ji mentioned, technology can transform education in a variety of ways by supporting multidisciplinary teaching, enabling personalization, creating the link between the home and the school, as well as improving teacher agency and increasing teacher effectiveness. As he was very rightly highlighting, this will be key to ensuring that none of our students are left behind and will allow us to bridge the learning gap that came about as a result of the pandemic. And as we think about the way forward, so you did mention that there is no easy solution, but it will be important to ensure parity in access, parity in quality. Hearing from Dr. Ratan Kanwar, it is heartening to see the steps that states like Gujarat are taking towards increasing access to technology, especially post the pandemic, which will be instrumental in taking quality learning to every child and at the last mile. Ma'am also touched on an important aspect of effective EdTech implementation, catalyzing learning agents, such as teachers and community influencers, to ensure that students remain more meaningfully engaged with EdTech. As Sumit highlighted, it is integrated thinking and school transformation, according to him, that can bring about real change. And we will need that system transformation with technology as an enabler. In short, we need to work on teacher empowerment, building district state capacity, building school systems, and school to home integration are the points that Sumit highlighted. Finally, as Nathan has rightly pointed out, clear integration between the public and private sector, dedicated partnerships across multiple sectors, and institutionalized government support are key to technology-led transformation to truly reimagine education. To close, I would like to draw from the conclusion of our EdTech working paper. We remain optimistic about the power of technology to eliminate the borders and walls of the classroom so that every child has access to the best quality education both in school and at home. The synergistic actions of all stakeholders present in the EdTech ecosystem, be it governments, teachers, schools, parents, can be transformational and help us reimagine traditional ways of teaching and learning to positively impact the learning outcomes of millions of children in India. Thank you everyone for being a patient audience. Thank you panelists for your valuable time. And we look forward to engaging with all of you on feedback on this paper and on key imperatives that all of us can take together. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Gauri. Gauri, will you allow me 15 seconds to show one slide to all of you as the takeaway from the seminar?
Please.
Certainly.
Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
So this is the principle that we follow, that technology won't replace teachers, but teachers who use technology will probably replace teachers who do not use technology.
Fantastic. Couldn't have done better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.